on with the show, and I'd like to introduce to some and reintroduce to others Mr. Ken Coleman. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. How are you, Brenda?
I am just fine. I am just fine.
I think the first couple minutes that you just did was better than the trailer, if that's possible.
Well, I saw Annie. Annie is great.
I'm sure it
I
is.
saw the
I'm sure
film.
it is.
It's great. Kuwadin, the young lady,
Yes.
I call her Q. She is wonderful in it.
Getting
it's just a
rave
good
reviews.
movie. Yeah, in fact, she got nominated for a Golden Globe.
It's a beautiful thing.
She was the youngest person ever nominated for an Oscar, and that was last year.
Lots of people think that the Golden Globes is a bellwether for the Oscars.
Yeah, they do, and well, that's a whole nother
topic.
conversation. But Jamie Foxx is in it. Also, Cameron Diaz. It's a very good film. It's no dull points in the film. It's nothing dull.
I think Jackson will love it. Take
Right,
Jackson.
right. So if we get a chance to get the trailer up, we will. And I'd like to talk to you about $1 million worth of nerve, your new book.
Well, I'm excited about it, Brenda. It is my new book, as you know, and the first book that I wrote on this day, African American Life in Detroit. Table Talk and Brenda Perryman was among the first people to embrace it, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about book number 2, $1 Million Worth of Nerve.
This is, why did you name it this first?
Well, it's an interesting story, Brenda. There is a quote in the book, and one of the personality profiles that I write about is Louis Martin. Louis Martin was the editor of the Michigan Chronicle in the 30s and 40s. Louis was asked about how did you start the Michigan Chronicle and what were the events that started the Chronicle.
So he started the Chronicle in what year?
He was sent here
Do you remember
1936.
Okay.
He was sent here from Chicago. The Chicago Defender was the big paper, and it had a Detroit edition. Louis Martin gets sent to Detroit in 1936 with $135 in his pocket, and what he said is that and $1 million worth of nerve. Meaning that it took a lot to start a newspaper in 1936, a black newspaper in a town that was still pretty much white in 1936. There were lots of black people moving here, but it was a town that run like a lot of big cities in America. White folks were running institutions, and they started the Michigan Chronicle with $135 and $1 million worth of nerve.
Wow. And would you tell the audience basically what it's about?
Yeah, it tells the story of the Paradise Valley District and the Black Bottom District in Detroit in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. That was the heyday of those two districts. And Brenda, you will remember that Black Bottom was essentially the residential community that many African Americans lived in the 20s, 30s, and 50s, 40s.
You
50s.
know, the thing about Black Bottom, I wasn't there, but I wasn't there in 1925.
But you heard about it much
Contrary
later.
to popular demand. No.
Much later you heard about it.
But the thing about Black Bottom, the best thing about it was the entertainment,
Yep.
because a lot of times the street lights didn't work, the plumbing through the sewer system was bad. Some of the same things that are going on today.
It's amazing how these things, they're cycles, right? You have those challenges. And the entertainment section, Brenda, was known as Paradise Valley. So
Right.
the two communities buttressed each other. And really they were divided by Gratiot Avenue, just east of downtown Detroit. So the black community lived in Black Bottom. Some of the landmarks that are still there now is the old Miller High School site. That was essentially a big part of Black Bottom. Lafayette Park is essentially where Black Bottom was. So if you think of the 1300 Lafayette Tower, the glass houses, the Vanderbilt houses, that was the heart of Black Bottom. And just north of that was the entertainment district.
Right. And so many famous people came out of Black Bottom.
There's no question. Della Reese, the great singer and
Right.
actress,
Right.
went to Miller High School, grew up in Black Bottom. Many people, jazz aficionados, will remember Milt Jackson, the great
Right,
vibraphonist.
right.
Kenny Burrell, the great guitarist. They all came out of Black Bottom, and the Diggs family, Charles Diggs Sr. and Charles Diggs Jr., both lived in Black Bottom.
And that's a family that left a real big legacy.
No question.
Now, how did you find out all this information?
Well, going back again to On This Day, African American Life in Detroit, which is, as you know, you feature on Table Talk. It is a day-to-day account of black events carried out by blacks in the 18th century, 19th century, and 20th century. What I kept coming back to in researching that book was information about Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And I said, this is a book unto itself.
Right,
So I
right.
took about a year to write On This Day. And as soon as I finished On This Day, I started writing $1 Million Worth of Nerve. And 16 months later, this is the product.
Wow, it's spectacular because you have people like Sonny Wilson.
Hmm.
Why don't you tell the audience
Sure.
briefly about Sonny Wilson because he was the man.
Absolutely. Sonny Wilson was a preeminent entertainment a businessman. He owned probably the most popular bar and nightclub in Detroit, in the Forest Club. But he also owned a hotel, the Mark Twain Hotel in Detroit, one of the few African American owned hotels in the 1940s. And really, Sonny goes into our heyday in lifetime. I mean, Sonny ends up living to be 97 years old.
Right.
He passed in 1998. And so he is probably one of the people in the book that sort of bridges the generations. He was certainly around in the 30s, but many of us remember Sonny being a very vibrant business leader up until the 1990s when he was in his 90s.
I've seen him before. In fact, I shook his hand before because as old as he was still hanging out at these clubs and everything.
And with his shoes, what do they call those shoes? The women's were spectators, but the wingtip shoes for men he wore, and a fedora hat. He always wore colorful jackets, sports jackets, and the like. And he was very vibrant. I mean, very active until his last years with us. But he is in the book. The aforementioned Charles Diggs Sr. is one of the people profiled in the book. Alberta Adams, the great blues singer.
Yes, I was going to talk about her because what year did she pass?
Well, interestingly enough, Alberta Adams, of the 21 people that I featured, she's the only one who is still with us.
Oh, she's still. Oh.
She's not in the best of health. I did get a chance to talk with her about this time last year. Her grandson offered me the opportunity to meet Miss Adams, and I did talk to her. When you are 97, 98 years old, you got a lot of days you don't feel as well as you used to, but it was great to meet her. Of the 21 people featured in the book, Miss Adams is the only person who's still with us.
Isn't that something? But we have Ziggy Johnson.
Ziggy Johnson. Oh my
Ziggy
goodness.
Johnson. He was the one who taught
Jackie
Wilson those
Jackie
moves
yeah.
because we used to love to see Jackie Wilson in his pants.
Jackie Wilson can't do.
I didn't say that right, but he was on he was on Ed Sullivan's show, and he just turned around, repeat.
Before Michael Jackson, and I guess to some extent, I think he really predates James Brown, at least in terms of his popularity.
He does.
Before those gentlemen, and not to take anything away from them, but Jackie Wilson was a dynamic personality, and he was trained to dance by Ziggy Johnson, who is one of the people featured in the book. Ziggy, as you know, operated a dance school, a popular dance school for youth. He was also the MC at the Flame Show Bar in Paradise Valley.
Wow, yeah, Ziggy Johnson, he's a legend.
Oh,
many of these people are just legends and left such a legacy. And Sidney Barthwell.
Yeah,
Let's talk about Barthwell drugs and all that.
Absolutely. I mean, Barthwell is the great American business story, right? In 1929, it's the start of the Great Depression, and Sidney Barthwell had just graduated from college, from Cass Tech, and then what's known now as Wayne State's Pharmacy School. He seeks out to start a business in 1932 in the heart of the Great Depression.
Right.
He starts a business that mushrooms into 13 drugstores that offer ice cream, soft ice cream, fountain ice cream for Detroit residents. He did it all without a Small Business Administration loan, didn't get much help from the bank, but he was an incredible entrepreneur, particularly when you think about the 30s and 40s, which were lean times economically.
Right. And his wife, she went on to continue with.
She did. In fact, I write in the book, they got married, I believe it was on Christmas Eve, the second or third year that Mr. Barthwell was in business. She was really Mr. Barthwell's right-hand person in the operation of the stores, and as you point out, carried them on. Mr. Barthwell's last store closed in 1987. So from 1932 to 1987, he operated successful businesses in the city.
Right.
And he was African American, which is not too. obviously the 21 people in the book, they're all African Americans. I point that out because, it was certainly difficult for anybody to operate a business in the 20s and 30s. I imagine that the Werner fountain stores didn't do as well as they did later. They didn't do as well as they did much later in the 1930s. But Barthwell really
operated. Why do you say that?
Well, I just think it was a tough economic time. You had massive layoffs. You had a burgeoning city. African Americans come to the city from the South. Whites come from the city from the South. Immigrants come from Europe, and they're all fighting for housing. They're all fighting for jobs. They're all fighting for a way of life, one in which they expect to have a better one than where they came. And you saw a lot of strife. We had a major race riot in 1943. Lots of it was based on the economic challenges and the strife of the economics of the time. And so it was difficult to operate a business for anyone. But Barthwell goes on to do it. And as I pointed out, most of his stores were in Black Bottom. But the last store, the store that closed in 1987, many people that live in what's known as the Dogleg section of the city now.
What is the Dogleg
Well,
section?
it's at South Fort Street, Fisger Road,
Right.
Electric, Beatrice,
Yes.
those cities that would
My mother lived over there years ago.
part of the city that would buttress River Rouge, Ecorse,
Right.
that area of town.
Wow. Another person, and they always see his drive is Robert Louis Bradby.
Sure, popular street now, but in the 1920s and 30s, Robert Bradby Sr. was probably the preeminent African American pastor in Detroit. Robert Bradby pastored Second Baptist Church, which was the first black church in Michigan. Second Baptist gets started in 1836. Robert Bradby comes here from Canada in 1910 to pastor Second Baptist, and he did so from 1910 to his death in 1946.
Wow. And Ulysses Boykin.
Yeah, what can you say about Ulysses Boykin? I mean, certainly he was a preeminent newspaper man in the 30s and 40s. He worked both at the Michigan Chronicle and the other African-American paper, the Detroit Tribune. But Ulysses Boykin also went on to really be, we certainly know, particularly here, we certainly know the great history of WGPR TV. WGPR TV does not happen without Ulysses Boykin. Mr. Boykin certainly worked with Dr. Banks. Dr. Banks was the founder of WGPR, to be sure. But Mr. Boykin was able, through his relationships with President Nixon and Republicans, because he was a Republican, was able to get WGPR the FCC license that it needed in 1975 to get started. Ulysses Boykin.
Really? Oh, we have a winner for the Annie gift pack. Tanisha Hughes.
Yeah.
Congratulations
Right.
to
Bravo.
Tamika. Tanisha,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Congratulations. You have to come to the station to pick it up. You could come this morning. It'll be waiting at the front desk for you.
It's a great
so,
pack.
check with her and make sure she could come this morning.
All right.
Oh, wow.
That's a great gift pack, too.
That is a
I hope
great-
she hurries. I'm going to be hanging around on the
I
side
know.
just in case she doesn't make
Shoot,
it.
me and the
Take-
Table Talk girls, we'll fight over that stuffed animal.
Yeah.
But yes, Ulysses
So Boykin was a very important figure, and Boykin is somebody else who like Sonny Wilson, who transcended the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Mr. Boykin died in 1987, so many of us got an opportunity to meet him
Right.
In his later years. He was also the public relations person for Prophet Jones. Remember Prophet Jones?
Of course.
Ulysses Boykin was Prophet Jones's PR guy.
Really?
And so when you would see Prophet Jones in Life magazine and in Jet magazine and in Ebony magazine, it was through the work of Boykin. He was a public relations maven. He was very active in politics and a strong business leader in our city.
And you say he was a Republican.
He was a Republican. Many African Americans were.
Yes.
Of course, the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, and up until the 1930s when FDR gets elected, and a couple of other figures in my book, Charles Diggs Sr. And Harold Bledsoe, they began a move in the early 1930s to move African Americans to the Democratic Party. Up until then, virtually all African Americans, everyone who could vote at least and did vote, were Republicans.
Right.
But slowly but surely, with the FDR New Deal, the federal programs, putting people back to work and the like, African Americans increasingly became Democrats. But Boykin was one of several people in the book who remained Republican, and they were real brokers. And the party, not to get off into a political conversation, but the Republican Party back in those days certainly
It
is
was
not
a different Republican Party.
no Tea Party, none of this stuff we're seeing, the assault on President Obama and the like. Many African Americans were Republicans. Another figure in the book that I write about, Dr. Alf Thomas, was a Republican, and he helped with two other doctors help bring the Detroit NAACP, the Freedom Fund dinner. So you could certainly argue that a very popular and a very popular black Republican helped bring the NAACP, the Freedom Fund dinner. Many people wouldn't think that'd be possible, but it was.
Wow,
It did happen.
Absolutely. And one of the founders of my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Beulah Whitby.
Yeah, fantastic figure in the 30s and 40s. Beulah T. Whitby ends up, her family is from Virginia. She comes here in 1925. She goes to graduate school for social work at the University of Michigan. That's what brings her to the region.
Right.
In 1942, Whitby becomes the manager of the Alfred Street Welfare Office. Remember, we're talking about tough economic times. Miss Whitby ends up managing a staff of over 80 people in the welfare office on Alfred Street in Black Bottom. She was a tremendous social activist. She, as you pointed out, was a national president of your sorority from 1941 to 1946. After that, she was a sociology professor at Wayne State and the University of Detroit. And she's somebody else who transcends the generations. We lost her in 1989. But so she had a great body of work here in Detroit proper.
Rollo Vest.
Yes, and as you know, certainly a student of culture and history, Brenda, if there's no Rollo Vest, there's no Paradise Valley.
No Paradise
In fact,
Valley.
the very name itself comes from Rollo Vest in a contest that he held. He was a columnist at the Detroit Tribune at the time, at the Detroit Courier that would become the Michigan Chronicle. He holds a contest to name this vibrant business community, a section of town. Paradise Valley ends up being the name, and so in many ways, Mr. Vest is the father of Paradise Valley.
Oh, okay. I wonder if he's related
Hilda
to
and
Donald.
We've been doing that research. We don't believe it's many people, particularly because of the connection, the cultural connection in terms of art and the like, and entertainment. But there doesn't appear to be a connection to Donald and Hilda Vest and Rollo.
Yeah, it just interesting
It's-
because they were in the arts.
And it's not a very, it's not the most popular names.
Right.
But no connection that we've been able to figure out anyway.
I've been intrigued by Mr. Horace White.
Mm-hmm.
He lived on Marston. I know where that is on the north end.
On the north end. That was, before Boston Edison and before the old West Side. The north end is where the black elite lived. It's
Yes.
where, Reverend White lived. It's where, for many years on King Street, where Harold Bledsoe lived. Horace White became the pastor of Plymouth Congregational Church in 1936. He came here from Ohio. He died very young at age 49, but there are a couple firsts that he is responsible for. He's the first African American to serve on a City of Detroit commission. He was president of the Housing Commission in 1948, but before that he was elected to the House of Representatives. He served one term in the Michigan House, and Plymouth Congregational was one of the leading churches in our community, and in many ways Reverend White was the conscience of the black community. I mean, he would have been to some extent the Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson of our community.
Wow, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. There's so many people. But I want to talk about this cover.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this cover are the doctors from Dunbar Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you give them a little history on Dunbar?
Absolutely. Dunbar Hospital opens in 1918. Now, it is not the first African American hospital. Mercy Hospital in 1917 was the first black hospital, but this was the leading institution, and this is a great photo. It's my favorite photo of all time. I had it in On This Day, and I was searching for book covers, searching for a photo to be a book cover, and I said, you know what? I actually have it already. It is the staff photo, and for those of you who can't see it very well, it's about about 16 or 17 African American men. They're all medical doctors. They're dressed in their Sunday best, and it really shows, Brenda, I think the power of our community, even. And that photo was taken in 1922. Even at a time when African Americans were being lynched, African Americans couldn't vote, African Americans were, many families were just coming out of slavery. We had medical doctors and we had institutions in Detroit that provided medical care. Dunbar was the leading institution, and that's why I chose it for the cover photo. It was taken in 1922, and I should point out it's courtesy of the Detroit Public Library's Burton Historical Collection.
You know, Dr. Sweet, he practiced
He
there
did.
too.
He did practice there. He practiced there a little. As you know, his history very well. He came here a little bit after 1918, but certainly did practice. In fact, I think the first place he practiced before he was an independent practitioner was at Dunbar. It was really it was the training ground, to be sure. It was a real hospital. The site still stands, Brenda. If you can think about the Cultural Center, if you can think about the Detroit Science Center, and then go a little bit east to where Bethel AME Church is.
Yes.
There's a huge home there, brick home, beautiful home, on Frederick Street, right between St. Antoine and Brush. That is where Dunbar Hospital still sits as an institution. It isn't open anymore, but the building's still there.
And blacks could only go here.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't go to General Hospital. You couldn't go to later Receiving Hospital. African Americans were cared for by African Americans, and at one time in the 1940s, there were probably no fewer than 20 African American owned hospitals, some larger than others, but we took care of our own people.
Yeah, and and sometimes they had more facilities at the other hospitals, and it was very rare that one of our doctors got to go and take a patient,
Right.
because there were times they
If you
needed
needed
that-
urgent care,
Yeah, they
you could
needed
get
that
primary care at the black hospital. Oftentimes, the African American hospital doctor could, if they, certainly if they were in that stature, go over, take the patient over to Receiving, take the patient over to General Hospital and for service. But there was certainly racism involved in employment there in white-owned hospitals, not only for the doctors but for the housekeeping staff. And for many years, the Dunbars, the Mercies, Kirkwood, many of these hospitals went on into the 1960s because of racism.
Oh, wow, such a legacy, so many great facts and just good stories too.
Yeah.
And these are things that we should know about because this is part of our history. And really, they're a stepping stone. They're showing people how there were so many more odds against us at that time.
And that's, back to the title of $1 Million Worth of Nerve. We talked about Louis Martin making that point. But the reason why I chose the title is because all 21 of these people, it was $1 million worth of nerve to do what, right? To start a black hospital in Detroit in 1917. It was $1 million worth of nerve to start a black newspaper in 1936. $1 million worth of nerve to start a movement to get, for African Americans to live in other parts of the city other than Black Bottom. That's what Horace White did. That's what Reverend Bradby did. $1 million worth of nerve to be able to talk to Henry Ford and say, listen, I've got some great men that go to my church, and this is Reverend Bradby. I have got some great men that belong to my church. I would like for you to hire them for the Ford foundry plant. And at one time in the 1930s, anybody that Reverend Bradby referred to Henry Ford, Mr. Ford hired. That was the power of Robert Bradby Sr., and I think it took $1 million worth of nerve to have that drive to make that happen.
Right, and I guess as we pursue it, takes $1 million worth of nerve.
Absolutely, as we move forward.
Well, I tell you, where can people buy the book?
Yes.
Yeah,
the book.
please.
Well, we did a soft launch last month, Brenda. We totally sold out of the book. We will go into second printing in January. As with On This Day, there are two African American businesses. I don't know if we can name the businesses.
Yes,
oh,
name them.
great. Spectacles Detroit Downtown, a great boutique.
I'm going to have her on the show.
Zana's awesome. Zana will be carrying $1 million worth of nerve in January. Also, my good friend Eric Vaughn, son of Ed Vaughn. He has a great decorating. He does picture frames, but he sells art and everything else. Eric's I've Been Framed at 16527 Livernois, across the street from UAD. Yeah, they both will carry the book. You can get it on our website as well at www.onthisdaydetroit.com.
And he mentions Table Talk
I,
with Brenda
well,
Perryman on the back.
I could not have done this work without your support, Brenda. To be honest with you and be very candid with you, the support that you've given me on this day helped me financially and otherwise to be able to write $1 million worth of nerve.
Well,
I'm indebted to you.
It's funny because on the days that we air, and if there's been a singing group or a singer, I sing a
No,
song.
I've been on I've been on the show quite a few times, and you've been Diana Ross. You've been
I
you've
did.
been Martha Reeves.
I can't help it.
You can even do David Ruffin.
I know. Tell the audience your new position.
Yes, I'm very excited. In January, I will be communications director for Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, and so I'm excited about that. It's going to take a lot of my time, to be sure, but I'm happy to be returning to work as a congressional staffer.
Right, great.
Thank
So
you.
now we have Miss Tamika Spruce coming on in just a moment and talking about a wonderful, wonderful film. So stay tuned and stay with us. Thanks, Ken.